thank you all. And let's move to hearing a little bit from Lily. Are you up for this, Lily?
Yes, my favorite thing to
Hey,
do is talk because I am your cousin. So,
that's great. Well, I'm excited to have Lily on the Spark, and uh, Lily gave a great little synopsis bio in the WhatsApp group. And I was reading through that and I realized we could talk about all sorts of things. And in fact, Lily, we have, me and you, over a number of years talked about a number of things. And I don't even really almost know where to start. What would you like to say to share a little bit of your creative journey and some of the highs? You may want to share the lows, but I'm thinking of some of the highs and then if you can bring us up to the present day with what's on your plate at the moment.
yeah, for sure. I was going through those questions that you sent over. One of them being, how did you get into what you do? And I feel like writing started pretty early on in life for me. I was a really, really timid kid.
Mm.
Um, and I think interestingly, the purpose that church served when I was young was probably, if anything, a space where kind of creativity and daydreaming started to blossom. I can't say that I was walking away with any really big takeaways from the sermons necessarily, but I think when you're a kid, this practice of showing up to this one space where there's moments of quietness and singing and of a monotone priest going on and on, I think that church was really where I probably first became a writer. Um, yeah, and so that looked like, just kind of really enjoying English class when I was younger. Then I had some great English teachers. Then I had this moment with my uncle Bud, who has since passed away, but he was a priest. And when I was about 11 years old, he came up to me. I was sitting in a corner writing, and he just took what I was writing and he read it, and he was a bit of a character, but he literally like held his hand out over me and said, "You will be a writer." And it felt like one of those moments where I was slightly terrified, but um, it just felt true. And then I think in a lot of my adult life, I tried on different hats, kind of based off of careers that I thought would be impressive to other people. Figured I'd be like an international human rights lawyer. I trained with the police briefly in Washington, D.C. to ride along on domestic violence calls. And there was many different paths I could see my life taking, but I think I kept coming back to writing as the thing that we've talked about vocation a couple of times over the past couple weeks, but it just felt right and like the most me. And I think there's a little bit of intangible feeling that I'm guessing some of you other creatives might understand of like when you're doing your thing, there's just a thing that's present, and I think it's God, and I think it's
Mm.
many things. So um yeah, let's see, in terms of what the work has looked like, I studied playwriting, as I mentioned, and I went to Central St. Martin's, which is near King's Cross, for those of you who live in London. Staged my first play in London that Dave actually came and saw, and then also brought it to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for a bit, but was kind of simultaneously getting more into television writing. And yeah, so there's two projects that I thought it might be interesting to talk about with you guys today, that I think tap into some of what I had mentioned in this bio about like the type of women that I feel drawn to writing about. Um, and I think one ask that I have for the group is that any TV shows or movies that you have watched that you feel like depict Christian or even just other religious women in an authentic and nuanced manner. I would love to hear about those. because yeah, I started writing about these women because I didn't feel like I was watching any depictions of young Christian women that I felt were similar to myself. Um, and yeah, so the one project that I mentioned, I think in the bio, is a short film of mine. And this is currently, I have this really awesome British director attached, and we've teamed up with this Bulgarian producer because we're actually most likely going to be filming it in Bulgaria, which you might think is not the exact parallel to Judea that one would imagine, but actually, they have several regions that are quite similar to where you might have found Elizabeth and Zachariah living. So, this short film was inspired by a painting actually that I had seen called The Visitation. And The Visitation has been depicted by many artists in many different styles of art throughout time. So, if you even just Google that, you'll see these really stunning and oftentimes very colorful paintings of Mary and Elizabeth embracing. And both the women are pregnant during this visit.
Mm,
But I think what started to get my gears turning was this reality that Elizabeth had this miracle pregnancy. You know, she was quite a bit older than Mary, and also her husband was struck dumb. He was unable to speak from the moment she felt pregnant because he was doubtful of this miracle. And I really started to think about what it would be like in terms of them being potentially foils to each other as far as their experience of pregnancy. You know, in the Bible, it does say that Elizabeth is overjoyed and it's this very warm and joyful visit. But I think if I were Elizabeth, there would be a lot of fear and anxiety that would be kind of intertwined with the joy of, you know, I don't think I've ever experienced a miracle. I don't know if any of you have, but I fear that maybe that would be taken away, that, um, you know, what is guaranteed, she doesn't know. And I thought a lot about the role of like the messenger in the Bible, you know, when someone is visited by an angel or it's often to be delivered a divine message. And so I was like, okay, what role is Mary playing for Elizabeth in the sense of a kind of divine messenger? And because I think the brutal reality of even though these two women who have new life growing inside of them are coming together, both of their sons are murdered.
mm,
And, you know, I kind of, in the short film, went with this idea of like a mother's intuition and what does Elizabeth, maybe is some of her anxiety coming from a place of having a sense of how her son's life will end.
mm.
And so yeah, stay tuned. That'll be probably filmed later this year. Um, and the one other project that I'm just throwing these things out, Dave, and then maybe you
That's
can
okay. Yeah, yeah.
all of these random bits I'm mentioning. One of the TV pilots that I've written is called Ministries. Um, Ministries is about an Anglican hospital chaplain who moonlights as a dominatrix. And I love talking with especially other Christians about this pilot because it makes so many people so uncomfortable. Um, and I really wanted to write about a character who belonged, you know, you take two very, what people would imagine are polar opposite worlds, Christianity, faith, BDSM, and try to imagine how they might overlap. I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan. So the quote that had kind of started, had triggered the idea for this show is from The Problem of Pain.
Mm,
It's just a short quote I'll read really quickly. It's, um, we can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. So, Clementine, who's the main character in this TV show, I think she's someone who has confused suffering for holiness.
Mm,
She believes that pain and suffering are the things that bring her closer to God. She
mm,
believes pain is her vocation. You know, she ministers to people in the hospital, she ministers to people in the sex dungeon.
mm,
And the story is kind of about her journey of realizing that pain is not holiness
mm.
and suffering is not what God calls us to. Um, yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Brilliant. I don't know where to go from this. No, thanks, Lily. The and that one is written, but are you looking for? I can't remember where you're up to with that in terms of finding people to help you produce it and so on, or is that something you're still writing?
Yeah, so that one's written when I was living in London. I had some interesting conversations with British agents who felt this might not quite be the right fit for the BBC. And, you know, I think that's to be seen, but I'm now querying more with the American crowd,
Yeah,
probably more of like an HBO kind of vibe.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, a good, all the best with that, and that's great. I'm interested to hear about Elizabeth and Mary too, um, and the filming of that. That's exciting. I would hopefully we can send us anything that gets put on the screen. We'd like to see that. And you were also was a call out for any films, etc., TV shows with nuanced female religious characters. I was struck by what you said near the start that your creative journey began by feeling free to write in church. And I remember, um, I think it's Giles Fraser said, anyway, it was somebody was talking about the gift of being bored in church, actually. We don't have many spaces where we get to be kind of bored. And
Right.
that shouldn't probably be the aim of church. Like, I'm not sure we want to make it boring, but the fact is, if we are kind of bored, that can then allow for the space to create or to start to think about creating. Now, we could do that thing where we maybe talk in a more general way with others chipping in. But I just wanted to shift slightly. I liked what you wrote in your bio about being uh, raised in a family of evangelical ministers, Irish Catholic priests who celebrated the Mass in living rooms and fiercely independent religious women. Now, I know you're a family member, and I know a bit about the evangelical side of our family. In some ways, that's where our family lines overlap. But
Mm.
I've always been really intrigued about your family and in some ways your story. Do you find those different traditions, you could say, compete and also contradict, or do you find that they nourish? Because I feel like somebody with that background could. There are things about those things that might not be that easy. I'm sorry, this
Mm.
is this is lots of questions in one. And were they? I'm thinking particularly about the evangelical minister side. Uh, were they support or have they been supportive of your creative endeavors, more or less? Would you be able to comment a bit about that? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I feel like the combo of those two backgrounds is something that only other Christians can really understand is a little bit might, you know, birth some interesting contradictions.
Yeah.
And you know, I think the evangelical side, so for those of you who don't know, Dave's aunt and uncle, is that who my
Yes,
grandparents are too?
that's who your
Um,
grandparents are. Yeah.
we're missionaries in Argentina, and that's where my dad was born and raised in Buenos Aires. And actually, one of my other TV pilots is inspired by my grandmother's life in Buenos Aires. And I think it has a lot to do about the women who taught me these faith traditions that has allowed me to maybe sort of blend them a little bit more, or sort of like inhabit both of them. Because my grandma Betty was in her own way, kind of prolific among the evangelical world of 1970s Argentina. And she was such an amazing writer and communicator that she essentially became a preacher in her own right, which wasn't quite allowed and led to some sticky situations. But if anything, I credit her for kind
Mm,
of teaching me the power of storytelling and of words and of moving people with words. Um, and then I say this like with, I think the Irish Catholic tradition taught me a lot about repression and guilt. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with, my family members, but I think um, actually inhabiting those spaces kind of like allowed, like I think with the character of Clementine, like in ministries, I can explore a bit what happens when someone has had to push down certain parts of themselves.
mm,
Um, but I think, one of your questions also had been about like, do you attend church and kind of
mm,
what,
mm,
what's even your relationship to God? And I do think where I'm at in my life in this moment, having these two traditions has put me in an interesting position because so I'm 30 years old and had been raised going to Catholic church my entire life. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And we all, couldn't go in person anymore. And I think since then have just been doing a lot of exploration of the role of church in my life because God has been a constant in my life. And I think church community a little bit less so because I unfortunately, I think have encountered maybe in a city like New York, the people who are going to church more regularly, there might be a little bit more closed mindedness in terms of like conservatism. And, I think even as someone who's dating in New York City, it is like a bizarre and fascinating process of trying to share faith
mm,
when you're dating. And it usually tends to be people look at you like you've grown a third arm or something.
mm.
And um, I was having a conversation, like I went on a date recently with this guy who he was like, "Oh yeah, what about religion?" And I did my carefully worded like, "Yes, like believe in God, was raised this way, but I'm very open-minded." And he was like, "Yeah, I actually have started praying recently again, and it's like totally changed my life." And I was like, and then
Okay.
we had this fascinating conversation. So, I think I'm like coming at all of this sort of from a little bit of a different, it's
Mm.
like I don't have my solid church community yet. I've been going to a lot of Episcopalian church because I think it's the most similar to Anglican, which I loved when I was living in London. Yeah, lots of
Yeah,
rambling.
no, no, the Anglican and an Oden may have a similar view, but the Anglican slash Episcopal Church, I think, is just it's kind of so sufficiently sort of broad and kind of covers a multitude of sins, and I think it's often people end up on a journey that they possibly brings them there. Anyway, I say that as an ordained person. What you said there was also kind of one of my questions, which is that do you find um, you're constantly having to navigate within Christian circles, for example, the idea of a hospital chaplain who's a dominatrix by night might just be like, what do we do with that? We get the hospital chaplain bit, but we don't really have anything to say about the dominatrix. And then equally, I can imagine that you might be pitching your ideas to producers who are like, oh, the dominatrix bit sounds interesting, but what are we going to do with a hospital chaplain? So,
Right.
and then, you described tensions between the Catholic perspective and the evangelical perspective, and tensions when trying to date in New York in terms of how you wear faith That must be quite a tricky line for you, Lily. I don't know if you could say anything about that. I mean, I think it's a courageous line, and do you find it tricky?
Yes. Yeah. I'm hmm, identity, it's
Yeah.
always going to be a little bit of a tricky one. I mean, I think it makes for compelling characters, which is why this has probably ended up informing so much of my creative writing.
Mm,
I think that we all have a tendency to want to simplify
mm,
things, people, ourselves. Um, and I think I've encountered sometimes Christians who might their faith might have a little bit to do with kind of simplifying the way things are and how things work, which and then just as similarly in the secular world. And I think but the reality is that none of us are simple. And
mm,
so I think I found, like, as I try to enter spaces and just keep shouting from the rooftops that, like, we all contain these multitudes and contradictions within us, most people relate to it. And oftentimes we're just afraid of things that we don't know.
mm.
And um like in so even with like ministries, like I love sitting down and talking with someone about why a dominatrix might actually have a profound connection to God, and not necessarily just because of their line of work. But yeah, I think I probably for the longest time felt very uncomfortable about the contradictions within myself. But I don't think God calls us to be um, easy to understand, or
Sure, sure. No, funny enough, this has happened a few times completely unintentionally, but I mean, a little bit of what I was trying to get at with that passage. If Jesus reconciles all things, then almost what you're talking about is a reconciliation of things that people might not think is possible to reconcile. But but anyway, it might be part of some of the Jesus things that go on. Um,
Mm.
no, brilliant. Uh, what's some of the things we can be praying for you about, Lily? I realize we could talk all night, I know, and I don't know if there.
Yeah.
We'll come back and do more chat in a minute, but perhaps we can do a little bit of prayer and then yeah, things to pray for you.
So, one thing is that when I had come back to New York, I had picked up a job in like healthcare technology, just for more peace of mind with paying the bills. And then I had the unique blessing of being laid off about a month ago.
Mm,
And it's so fascinating because I wanted out of there so
mm,
badly. And I just felt scared. Like I did not feel brave enough to just quit.
mm,
And it was such a toxic environment. And I just know with every fiber of my being that God was like, boop, and just made the decision for me.
mm,
And I'm so grateful because I think it's allowed me to completely jump back into writing. So, one prayer request is just that um, I can continue to be brave and maybe not like revert to a path that would be easier, more secure, and more understood by others, and kind of keep trusting
yeah.
what I believe my vocation to be. Um, and then one other specific one is that with the visitation, there's one quite sizable fund that we've applied to. And with short films, kind of the quality ends up depending a lot on how much, money you can get from different funding to go into. And we have a bit now, but this would be for a £50,000. And we would find out at Cannes in May, the Cannes Film Festival. So that would just be amazing if that
Yeah.
worked out. But so I guess bravery to keep pursuing the vocation, bravery to keep pursuing love,
Yeah.
um, and the Bulgarian Film Fund as well.
Okay. I keep thinking of things I want to ask you, and so we will pray. Do you, in terms of your like the practice of writing, do you set aside time in a sort of structured way to try and write? I mean, this is almost a little bit thinking about some of the things that Ellis was saying last week as well, or does it just kind of pour out of you in chunks, and and then you have to go and find jobs and do other things to pay the bills?
Mm. When I was younger, it was definitely a bit more of like the pouring outness.
Mm,
And I think since I'm blessed right now to have some more open time, I've been quite structured with my approach because I have 5 different television pilots, kind of
mm,
very different worlds. So it requires kind of be able to turn off and on some different parts of the brain,
yeah,
as well as a play that is going into development in New York. So yeah, I think structure has been necessary in this season of life, but then also I kind of know what Alice was talking about because, and I feel like Amy had maybe mentioned something too with art. Like sometimes, like it just, like there is this experience where it kind of like, it just like pours out and you're not even really, it's like, it's not even your hands kind of doing it. It's just coming out.
yeah, yeah.